We're just days from the big presidential debate, and a pair of polls show the race getting tighter in Texas. We look closer at what's driving the numbers as we move closer to Election Day. Can the state of Texas eliminate property taxes? Lawmakers are doing the math, and it's not pretty.
I don't think anyone wants to see their sales tax rate go to 20%.
We look at the new push for property tax relief and why some plans may be off the table next session.
Finding ways to work with the other side of the aisle. And I think this is really important for our state.
Rick Perry makes a move to shake up the race for Speaker. We look at what he's doing to help Dade Phelan hold on to power.
So there's a lot of moving pieces here that have to come together simultaneously.
Texas voters approved more than $1 billion to expand broadband in the state. But even though money's available, there are big challenges to overcome.
Produced from the Capitol in Austin and airing statewide, this is the award-winning State of Texas.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. I'm Will Dupree. We are less than 2 months from Election Day and just 2 days from the first debate between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. Now, 2 new polls are showing the race for president getting tighter here in Texas. A poll from Emerson College and our partners at The Hill shows Trump leading Harris 50-46. That is within the margin of error. The poll was conducted earlier this week. Meanwhile, the Texas Politics Project at the University of Texas also released new polling on Friday. Their results show Trump with a 5-point lead over Harris, which falls right at the edge of the poll's margin of error. That poll was conducted in the last 9 days of August. We want to dig deeper into the numbers now. Joining us is Jim Henson, the executive director of the Texas Politics Project. Jim, always good to see you. I have been clamoring to see these numbers because there's been so much shifting dynamic within this race. And what your numbers showed in this survey is that the race is much tighter here in Texas. What do you attribute to that?
Well, I mean, I think there's 2 different, forces combining here and looking at these numbers. On one hand, everybody has seen in all the polling and what's going on in the campaigns, a surge in Democratic interest and enthusiasm since Kamala Harris replaced Joe Biden at the top of the ticket. And we picked up on that as we saw closing gaps in some of the major races and clear indications in the direct polling in which we asked people about how enthusiastic they were, Democratic enthusiasm way up. So that's the change part. But there's also some continuity here that I think is a little bit tricky and important to recognize, which is that, as you and I have spoken about several times, the margin of the Republican wins at the presidential level has been declining in Texas for several cycles now. We were beginning to see a reversal of that decline when Joe Biden was at the top of the ticket. The replacement by Kamala Harris has kind of bent that curve back down to a more normal position that we would expect. So I think there's a continuity part in which this race is beginning to look a little more quote unquote normal by Texas standards, despite the fact that it's chaotic and as we know, there's a bunch of stuff going on.
Yeah, that's an understatement at this point. But we have talked about how Democrats have long wanted to flip Texas and have made that argument. But we also have to point out that no Democrat has won statewide here in 30 years. So does this poll suggest any kind of shift in the dynamics?
Well, I mean, I think what it suggests is that dynamic is not going away, because as we see the state getting more competitive at the top level at the top of the ballot over time, it feeds the optimism of Democrats. However many times that optimism has been disappointed, shall we say?
Right.
So I think we're moving more in that direction. I'm not ready to say that any of these numbers indicate a Democratic victory, but we are seeing the state become more competitive, and that, of course, is going to be encouraging to Democrats, whether it's likely to happen this cycle or not.
All right. Well, the presidential poll results that you all did are similar to what other polls have found here in Texas somewhat recently, but that is not the case for the race for the U.S. Senate seat. I want to show everybody some numbers. A poll from the University of Houston and Texas Southern University showed Ted Cruz with a 2-point lead over Democrat Colin Allred. The numbers from Emerson College and The Hill show Cruz with a 4-point lead. And the Texas Politics Project survey shows an 8-point margin in favor of Cruz. Tell me about the difference in those numbers. What do you attribute to that?
Yeah, well, one of the things that should be on your slide is that the first two polls that you showed are using what they're calling likely voters. So they are coming up with some method, and these are usually a mixture of methodology and style, to narrow the group of people being polled and the report and the basis of those numbers into something we think of as somebody that's a likely voter. Our polls to date have relied just on registered voters, and again, there's a mixture of method and style and preference here. In our view, it's too early to really have a very good estimate of what a likely voter is going to be. There are hundreds of millions of dollars yet to be spent in these campaigns between now and Election Day. Voters have just now started paying attention. We'll switch to a likely voter screen right before the election, but that likely voter screen is, the use of different underlying populations is what's driving some of these differences.
Yeah, and you all talked to 1,200 registered voters here in Texas for this particular survey. Just wanted to point that out too. But give us a sense behind the curtain a little bit.
Sure.
How much more difficult is polling to do now? Do people respond as much as they used to, or in different ways?
Well, I think it's no secret that we've been wrestling with the challenges of polling for a long time. I would argue, really, it starts with the invention of the cell phone, if not further back with the invention of caller ID. And technology has really changed that. I think more recently, one of the challenges right now is figuring out who is not responding to polls and if there's any pattern in that. In other words, is there a pattern bias in the group of people that just no matter what are not going to respond to a poll? And the research is mixed on that. In some cases, we think that there may have been some of what we call, kind of shy Trump voter, et cetera. That has not really played out in terms of research. But it's something we have to keep an eye on because it's a moving target. As we said a couple minutes ago, this is a very volatile environment and it's making polling more difficult.
Yeah, and moving forward, are you all planning to do any more polls ahead of Election Day?
Yeah, we'll be back in the field before the election, and that's when you'll see a likely voter screen. It's the time we think is appropriate.
All right, we'll look out for that too. Jim Henson with the Texas Politics Project, thank you as always.
Always enjoyable.
A delegation of Texas congressional Democrats is calling on the U.S. Justice Department to investigate Attorney General Ken Paxton. The lawmakers claim Paxton is taking actions to keep Latinos from voting. The call for a federal investigation comes as Paxton ramped up efforts to investigate potential voter fraud. The lawmakers say Paxton's office searched homes of elderly Latino election volunteers and seized phones and computers in San Antonio. According to the warrants obtained by the Texas Tribune, the investigation is focused on a woman who the state alleges has been collecting ballots for the last 25 years. In a news release, Paxton said an investigation spanning 2 years provided sufficient evidence for those search warrants. In that same news release, Paxton said this: "We are completely committed to protecting the security of the ballot box and the integrity of every legal vote. This means ensuring accountability for anyone committing election crimes." The delegation of Democrats say they believe Paxton could be violating federal civil rights and voting rights laws.
We know very well that the Attorney General has used his office historically as a way of pursuing political efforts. From my perspective, he has a history of misusing his power, and we have seen it in a very alarming way.
We reached out to the Attorney General's office for comment on the Democrats' call for a federal investigation. We did not receive a response. The Democrats' call came on the same day Paxton filed a lawsuit against Bexar County. He's suing the county over its plan to send voter registration forms to unregistered voters. Paxton claims the move is illegal. He says it could encourage ineligible people, such as felons and non-citizens, to commit a crime by attempting to register to vote. Bexar County leaders voted Tuesday to mail out registration forms, saying it's a way to help people who recently relocated to the county to register to vote. After the vote, Paxton sued, demanding state judges block the move. On Thursday, Paxton's office filed a similar lawsuit against Travis County. This one aims to stop the county from paying a private company to identify the names and addresses of potentially unregistered voters. Paxton claims the county is paying partisan actors. A county spokesperson, though, sent us a response saying, in part, "We remain steadfast in our responsibility to uphold the integrity of the voter registration process while ensuring that every eligible person has the opportunity to exercise their right to vote." All of this comes about a month before the October 7th deadline to register to vote. The race for Texas House Speaker is not on your ballot, but the results will have a big impact on decisions that affect your life. We look at who's in the race and why a former governor is getting involved.
We want to do what's right for Texas as we navigate these critical deadlines.
Texas has more than $1 billion available to expand broadband service, but state leaders are still working out how to get resources to areas seeking help. Some are calling on the state to get rid of all property taxes. Now lawmakers are doing the math and struggling to find an answer.